The Tears of God. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This book continues the story of the Arab sugar daddy and the beautiful Indian girl, and the story of the Indian child bride and the old Arab husband, and the story of the Indian Miss World and the rage of Muslims of the world, and also the story of Christina and the complete Jew. They have been written in English and translated into Arabic by the author Dr. Ahmed. This tale resonates with genuine love, strong resilience, and steadfast courage. I invite you to accompany me as I narrate the adventures of the extremely beautiful Indian girl, Aphrodite Khan, and her handsome American lover, Michael Lewinsky, in the Muslim world. Before we dive in the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader this novel is narrated in 6 books. Book 1, The Arab Sugar Daddy and the Beautiful Indian Girl. Book 2, The Indian Child Bride and the Old Arab Husband. Book 3, The Indian Miss World and the Rage of Muslims of the World. Book 4, Christina and the Complete Jew. Book 5, The Tears of God, Jews, Blacks, and Muslim Women. And Book 6, The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. This is an intriguing epic story which exhibits resilience, love, and sacrifice. Book 5. Researching the social life of the Muslim woman in the Islamic world. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief passages from a review for printing in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All characters in this novel are fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 18. Queen Semiramis. The American couple once again changed their travel plan. Instead of forsaking their research, their experiences in the Middle East so far convinced them to continue staying in the Third World to carry on their work. It is clear to them that there are so many things to do in this dark and backward part of the world. They decided to forsake their unfruitful efforts of preaching the gospel of Jesus to the Arab Christians of the Middle East. Many of those Arabs believe that they were born Christians, and their forefathers were followers of Christ before Jesus incarnated as a human being and came to earth. They do not want anyone to preach to them the good news of Christ. They feel offended and sometimes become hostile if someone tries to convert them from being nominal Christians to true Christianity. Accordingly, instead of wasting their time with those arrogant Arabs, the American couple chose to carry on with their original decision of documenting the abuse of Muslim women in the Third World, so that when they return to their country, they can draft a book on the abuse of Muslim women in the Muslim world. Following their failed attempts in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Dubai, and Lebanon, this time the couple decided to take the risk and travel to one of those Muslim countries that are notoriously known for their religious fanaticism, violence, terrorism, abuse of women and children, backwardness, and ignorance. The last 2 features of ignorance and backwardness are common in all 55 Muslim countries, from Burkina Faso to Indonesia, from Morocco to Bangladesh, from Yemen to Turkey, and from Tanzania to Kazakhstan. All the 1.5 billion Muslims wherever they go, and wherever they live commonly share these features in lesser or greater degrees as part and parcel of their religious beliefs. After consulting the violations of human rights recordings on the Internet, the American FBI's listings of wanted terrorists, and the International Criminal Court's past and recent trials of persons who committed crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocides, Malik and Malika have singled out and concentrated on 8 Muslim countries: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Sudan. The last 6 of those countries are listed among the 10 most backward countries in the world. Almost 80% of their population is illiterate. Their streets are the filthiest in the world. In those countries, domestic animals like dogs, cats, donkeys, goats, sheep, cows, camels, and horses live side by side with human beings. Their houses are always teeming with all kinds of insects such as lizards, ants, flies, mice, snakes, scorpions, mosquitoes, cockroaches, and other bloodsuckers. Sometimes, dangerous wild animals such as hyenas, foxes, and wolves visit their houses at night and kidnap a chicken, a goat, or a baby and run away. The houses are made out of grasses, ropes, and wood, and some huts are created out of discarded backing materials which are fire hazards. Many times, a bolt of lightning set a house ablaze and burned it down into ashes. During the rainy season, the flood can wipe out the entire house and leave its inhabitants coverless. Burglary is a common phenomenon during summer. A burglar can jump inside one of those grass houses just like entering his own house. If anyone tries to hinder a burglar from stealing, he will be killed, and his blood will be upon his shoulders. Burglars use a stick that looks like a sword on one end and a hammer on the other end. So, the wise thing to do when you see a burglar is to pretend to be asleep like a corpse. Most of their houses have no toilets and bathrooms, and therefore they use either common public washrooms or go to the wilderness to answer the call of nature. Some poor people wait for the rain to rinse their emaciated bodies. Their little ones urinate and defecate everywhere in the lanes and streets same as their animals do. An American preacher visited one of those countries and said, "It is a miracle that people can live in such filthy streets and homes and not fall sick and die." The third world is an extremely dangerous place to live in. It is underdeveloped and primitive. The countries are corrupt. Their military soldiers and policemen are more dangerous than gangsters. Their political leaders are tyrants, and their religious leaders are terrorists. The minds of the people are empty of any useful knowledge but filled with all kinds of superstitions and religious legends. In addition to those curses and evils, the people are very violent and most of them are dangerous religious terrorists. Some poor people wait for the rain to rinse their emaciated bodies. Their little ones urinate and defecate everywhere in the lanes and streets same as their animals do. An American preacher visited one of those countries and said, "It is a miracle that people can live in such filthy streets and homes and not fall sick and die." Every young man wants to blow himself up in bits and pieces and kill other innocent people, including their women and children. Due to their constant strife for power and civil and religious wars, there are always social upheavals, which resulted in mass displacement and migration to neighboring countries and living in the UN camps as refugees and ultimately getting resettled in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and the Netherlands. They are divided into various religious sects and groups. Every sect and every group claimed to be the sole possessor of the truth, and hence condemned others as infidels and strived to kill them. The Muslim of the Sunni sect will blow his body up in smithereens inside a crowded mosque of the Shiite sect. The Shiite Muslim will load a car or truck with bombs and go and blow it up in a crowded Sunni market. Those third world countries also are extremely poor and unable to support their ever-growing population with their limited resources. Many of the youth are ready to do anything they can to escape from their miserable conditions and go to Europe. There are human smugglers in the Mediterranean sea shores of Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. They use big floating boats to smuggle illegal immigrants across the Mediterranean Sea to European shores. Each boat will be loaded more than its maximum capacity. One cannot move a limb in those overcrowded boats. The boat will be stuffed with children, women, old and young men. Now and then one of those boats will be tossed by the huge waves and capsize due to overloading. The latest report stated that 500 Syrians and Palestinians were drowned when their boat went down. Not a sole survivor. Hundreds of Somalis, Sudanese, Africans, and Arabs of different nationalities were drowned in the sea. The smugglers charge each passenger several $1,000s. Some young women sell their bodies as prostitutes to raise such a huge amount. Those who cannot afford to pay $3,000 to $4,000 move to another country and join the refugee camps. Those displaced poor people became a heavy burden on the United Nations. The UN offices will try to get rid of those masses as soon as possible by sending them for resettlement in the advanced countries. Among the first world countries, only Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and the United States of America agreed to take them. Other Western countries have closed their borders on the faces of those poor refugees. Unfortunately, when resettled, they bring along all their coping skills, evils, filthiness, religious fanaticism, terrorism, and violence. The American couple has been faced with the difficulty of choosing the least evil among those 8 Muslim countries. Syria and Iraq are ruled out immediately due to the presence of ISIS and the Jabhat al-Nusra in their soils. The al-Nusra Front is a branch of al-Qaeda operating in Syria and Lebanon. The Islamic Caliphate, which is universally known as ISIS, does not need a definition or introduction because if you ask the animals and birds, they will tell you what it is. Even the animals and birds did not escape the brutality of those ISIS terrorists. Many times, those demons of ISIS put bombs on donkeys, cows, and horses and sent them to the police stations or military bases of their enemies. Then from a far distance, they used a remote control and detonated the bombs. Suffice it to say that ISIS is called the bastard or the illegitimate child of al-Qaeda. By the way, recently the main leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, issued a fatwa condemning the brutality of ISIS and declaring its terrorists as kofar, or Muslim apostates. After that religious decree became public, the 2 terrorist groups began killing each other. However, after the planes of the world US-led coalition started to bombard indiscriminately the 2 terrorist groups, the action led to the reconciliation of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. The 2 terrorist groups felt that the war against the so-called the Great Two Devils, the imperialist United States of America, and the Zionist State of Israel, was more important and urgent than their differences. Therefore, they postponed their fight against each other and joined hands in fighting against the Great Satan America. Al-Qaeda also has its main headquarters in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It also operates terrorist branches in Yemen and Libya. Accordingly, the couple crossed those 4 countries and marked them with red ink as not safe zones for their peaceful mission. They remained with 2 countries, Somalia and Sudan. They must choose one of the 2. Somalia is ruled out because it is a failed state with no embassies or consulates anywhere in the world. Without any diplomatic representation, there is no way of getting official visas. Besides, in that Muslim country, there is the 3rd nastiest terrorist group in the world, the Somali Al-Shabaab, the Islamic Youth for Jihad. Finally, the couple is left with only one Muslim country, Sudan. Before traveling to Sudan, the couple decided to make some changes in their personal identifications. During their wandering in Egypt and Lebanon, they noticed that their present Muslim names were not familiar in the Middle East. Whenever Malaika introduced her name, she became a laughingstock among the Christian women. When she demanded an explanation for their unacceptable reactions to her name, she was told no girl ever went by that strange name. According to their justification, the name Malaika in the Arabic language means the plural of an angel. For them, it is funny for a girl to be named the angels. If Malaika is called Malik, which means an angel, that might be acceptable for Arab women. Malaika in the Swahili language means one single angel. Accordingly, Malaika decided to change her funny name. Malik is a common name in the Arab world but is not acceptable among Arab Christians because only Muslim family can name their child Malik. Therefore, Malik has been advised by some Arab Christians to change his name to Michael to be identified as a Christian man. At first, the couple felt there is an urgent need to change the name of Malaika. After searching the internet and consulting some good wishers among their Arab Christian acquaintances, the couple settled on the common name Samira. The name Samira in the Arabic language means jovial, entertaining, or pleasant companion, while in Hindi means air or wind. Malaika liked that name because it reminded her of her first Indian lover, the Bollywood film star Samir Krishna Khan, the son of her Hindu mother, Rani Krishna. Despite that, she kept that admiration hidden between her breasts, and did not disclose it to her American lover, spiritual friend, and husband, Michael Lewinsky. Not every pleasant memory for the wife is necessarily joyful to the husband. The true source of the name Samira can be traced back to the time before Christianity and Islam came to the Levant, Anatolia, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Persian Empire. Before the birth of Christ, it was used in that region and referred to as a widely accepted legend. Therefore, today, some Assyrians, Syrian Christians, Chaldeans, Iraqi Christians, and Muslim Iranians treasure the name Samira, tracing its origin back to the legendary queen, Semiramis. It is like the Disney fairy tale of the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. According to one version of that legend, Semiramis was a fish goddess. When her mother, the queen, gave birth to her, she drowned herself in the Euphrates River and left her at the bank. Semiramis was fed and raised by the fishes until a shepherd boy found her and took her to his hut. There is another legend that said that Semiramis was the queen wife of the first king in the world, King Nimrod, who built the city of Babel. Nimrod means we rebel. Therefore he and his subjects rebelled against God and built the Tower of Babel, which means the gate of God. The book of Genesis mentioned that God came down and confused their language and caused them to scatter all over the world. See Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9. Because of that rebellion, we have thousands of languages and thousands of tribes and nations in the world. There are many legends attributed by the Jewish Talmud to King Nimrod. The name Samira is a new variant of the ancient name Semiramis, the queen and consort of King Nimrod. According to Mesopotamian and Jewish legends, King Nimrod attempted to burn Abraham in the fire, but God miraculously saved him from the burning flames and the tyrant king. Some Mesopotamian and Jewish Talmudic legends were later reproduced exactly in the holy book of Muslims, the Quran, without changes. Today, in every capital city in the Middle East you will find a 5-star hotel named Semiramis. Based on an article titled, Semiramis, Armenian tradition portrays Semiramis as a beautiful woman who owned a brothel where she was a harlot with other prostitutes. These facts are partly to be explained by observing that, according to the legends, in her birth as well as in her disappearance from the earth, Semiramis appears as a goddess, the daughter of the fish goddess Atargatis, and herself connected with the doves of the goddess Ishtar or Astarte. This goddess Semiramis appears in many plays and operas, for example in Voltaire's tragedy. In 1910, Camille de Morlhan directed a film about Semiramis for Path, starring Yvonne Miraval. In John Myers's novel Silverlock, chapters 17 to 18, Semiramis appears as a lustful, commanding queen, who stops her procession to try to seduce young Lucius, who has been transformed into a donkey. In William Faulkner's Snopes trilogy, Eula Varner is her modern incarnation. Faulkner quite likely got the name from Dante's Inferno chapter 5, where she appears in the same list as Helen of Troy, as those punished for uncontrolled passion. The Assyrian people indigenous to Iraq, northeast Syria, southeast Turkey, and northwest Iran still retain Semiramis or Shemuramat as a given name for female children to this day. The name of that legendary queen, Semiramis, was a designation of honor and a royal name given to powerful women monarchs such as Margaret I of Denmark and Catherine the Great of Russia. In his book, The Two Babylons, 1853, the Protestant minister, Hislop claimed that the Queen Semiramis was an actual woman in ancient Mesopotamia who invented polytheism and, with it, goddess worship. Hislop believed that the Queen Semiramis was a consort of Nimrod, the builder of the Bible's Tower of Babel. According to Hislop, Semiramis invented polytheism to corrupt her subjects' original faith in the God of Genesis. She had deified herself as Ishtar and her son as Gilgamesh, as well as various members of her court and her then-deceased husband. In support of his report, Hislop talked about legends of Semiramis being raised by doves. He referred to the writings by the Church's ante-Nicene fathers to suggest that these stories began as propaganda invented and circulated by Semiramis herself, so her subjects would ascribe to her the status of Queen of Heaven and view her childhood as divine. He maintained that all divine pairings in religions, for instance, Isis-Osiris, Aphrodite-Cupid, and others, are retellings of the tale of Semiramis and her son Tammuz, and that this was then applied to the Virgin Mary and her son Jesus in Catholicism, even though Christianity does not support a special divinity of Mary, but rather to the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The figure of Semiramis was later developed into the Blessed Virgin Mary, according to Hislop's book. Hislop used this in support of his claim that Roman Catholicism is paganism. At any rate, the name Samir is the only name in the world that is commonly shared by Arab Christians, Muslims, and Hindus. Hindus write it as Samir with one letter, and Arab Christians and Muslims pronounce it as Samir with double letters. Those three religious groups also name their daughters Samira. When the American husband Malik understood the importance of that commonly shared name, he too decided to change his name to Samir after his Indian wife Samira. After changing their first name, the couple has been tempted to rid themselves of the Indo-Pakistani name Khan. Again, it is simply a cultural misunderstanding. This name is so precious for Indian and Pakistani Muslims, which means King of Kings, but for the Arab Christians, it is a bad name. For them, the word Khan phonetically sounds like a traitor. Once again, the couple discarded their last name and picked one so precious in the Muslim world, Ahmed. It is the second name of the Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, the couple thought that by claiming to have such an important name like Ahmed as their last name, they can appease the Muslims of Sudan. In the end, their disguise began with the Indian wife Malika becoming Samira, and her American husband Malik, Samir. Chapter 19. The Marriage of Al-Shahid, or the Muslim Martyr. Samir and Samira Ahmed are glad that they picked an Afro-Arab country this time. Sudan, though widely considered an Arabic entity, is populated by tribal Africans, who speak in vernacular tongues augmented with broken Arabic. Moreover, the Afro-Arab Muslim country is of so much interest to the American couple because it actively implemented Sharia law. Shortly after they arrived at Khartoum, Samir and Samira began to search for their subjects of interest. Experience has reinforced in them that every major Muslim city in the Third World hides its abuse of women behind the facade of respectable, grandiose buildings and institutions. The couple stayed shortly in a hotel in an area called Medinat al-Riyadh, which means the Sudanese city of Riyadh. Most of the people in this area are exceedingly rich and housed in opulent residences. Most of them are businessmen or families of rich Sudanese who are working in the Arab petrodollar countries. For that reason, the area bore a name alluding to its affluent Saudi counterpart. It is, for all counts, a smaller version of the capital city of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Experience has also taught the foreign couple that an opulent area such as Medinat al-Riyadh is not the right area, and Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, is not the right city for their subject of study. Groundwork and the help of Sudanese Christian acquaintances yielded a more appropriate city in western Sudan. In that city, they expected that they could successfully carry out their research on the abuse of Muslim women. In Africa, 99% of a woman's beauty is determined exclusively by her physical attributes. Unlike the Western, Arab, and Indian girls, the African girl's face and hair contribute little to the perception of her feminine beauty and sexual attraction. Typically, an African man will examine a woman's body to determine the extent of her beauty. Or otherwise, he will view her sideways. He does not care so much about her face or hair. Most African women have hair as short as that of their male counterparts. Their faces are similar to those of their fathers and brothers. There is a saying in Sudan, if you want to see how Fatima looks inside the house, you must see her brother in the market. Therefore, the key African female attributes for beauty revolved around the high breasts and the big buttocks. An African girl's boobs and big buttocks are highly erotic in the eyes of African society. Obviously, the larger the better in this aspect. There are some exceptions to the rule. Some tribes value highly raised breasts above all else, including a big backside, regardless of how large the buttocks are. The Sudanese Bagra tribe holds breasts in such high esteem that a major town in their province in North Kurdistan is gloriously named En Nahid, which means the women's breasts. In En Nahid city, the American couple Samir and Samira put up in a motel until they found a place to rent. The place they eventually found has a big hut and 2 small huts, all made of grass, ropes, tree trunks, and cow dung. The house is a veritable fire hazard. Any mistake with kindling, matches, or lighters can reduce the entire hut to ashes. It is common for lightning strikes to set an entire village ablaze and turned it into a total ruin, just like the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah. The proximity of the huts ensured complete destruction. Oddly, a group of huts in a fenced compound is referred to as a house. Every composite home has at least 4 grass huts, and a small one used as a kitchen. In addition, a compound features 2 grass toilets, segregated by gender, men and women, just like a public washroom. The entire compound, in fact, is divided into 2 sections, male and female. A physical barrier, a tall grass partition, ensured that men and women, even those belonging to the same family, must be strictly segregated. Samir and Samira rented one section from a poor family. Their section boasted a large hut which was their bedroom, a small kitchen hut, and a toilet. All 3 huts are made out of grass, wood, and cow dung. For a living room, as is the norm, they use the unsecured area in their compound. It has no roof or walls. It is like a small public park. Every morning and every evening they put their chairs to sit in. During the day, the oppressive heat makes it impossible for them to move out of their hut. The town they came to live in is in the middle of the Sahara Desert with a peak temperature as high as 45+ degrees Celsius. The owners of the house are 2 widowed women without children or relatives living with them. They are an old woman and her daughter-in-law. The late husband of the younger woman, who also is the son of the older woman, died a few years ago during the Jihad War in the Democratic Republic of South Sudan. This death happened before Sudan was divided into 2 countries, North Sudan and South Sudan. The husband was a soldier in the Northern Sudanese army. He was killed in a deadly battle between the so-called troops of Al-Rahman, the Muslim Mujahideen fighters of Allah, and the infidel rebels, the Southern Christian rebellious fighters. His wife and mother believe that he died as a martyr and hence is now in paradise. Allah would have by then married him with 72 beautiful virgins. Accordingly, on the day his wife and his mother received the sad news of his death, they shouted for joy and rejoiced greatly. Many women rushed to their house and congratulated them on the martyrdom of the brave soldier of Allah. Some of them brought with them candies and cookies to be distributed among small children to celebrate their happiness. For 7 days, their house turned into a wedding hall with every guest expressing their joy at the good news. It was a happy occasion, this Ers al-Shahid, or the heavenly marriage of the martyr. If the martyr was already dead and gone, then where was the bridegroom, and where was his bride? In the Muslim world, a child can answer that simple question. He will proudly tell you that the bridegroom is the martyr himself, and his brides are the 72 virgins of paradise. He can quote for you many verses from the Quran and several sacred hadiths of his prophet to support and validate his answer. The happy wedding celebration will last for a few days following the death or martyrdom of the bridegroom. But the celebration will not extend beyond 1 week. After that, his widowed wife and his other family members will be left to face the harsh realities of their miserable lives. The deceased martyr is known as Khalid, which means eternal one, and his widowed wife is called Salwa, which means heavenly manna. He was not survived by any children because his wife, Salwa, was barren. Khalid was the sole breadwinner in the family. His untimely departure was a great loss for his wife and mother. After the death of her husband, as a young woman, his wife Salwa could not work. It is a great shame and danger if she ventures out of her house to seek employment in the male-dominated society of Sudan. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, is an old woman, and hence she could not do any outside work. The two poor women live on what little pension is entitled to from the government. Needless to say, the arrival of the American couple is a great blessing to them. Their new foreign tenants are paying 10 times the local rate. Their house, as expected, is divided into 2 sections by gender. Since they did not have any men to occupy the male section, the huts were left closed for years. The old woman was afraid to rent it to a local male bachelor because she was scared to expose her young and pretty widowed daughter-in-law to sexual harassment. She also was worried that her daughter-in-law might be tempted by a young man and thus fall into disgrace or elope with her lover and leave her all alone. As is common in these parts, the moment a woman became a widow, she soon became a marked target for the young unmarried boys. While no self-respecting bachelor will consider marrying a second-hand woman who is used by another man before him, they have no qualms about pestering and sexually harassing a divorcee or a widow the way dogs chase a female dog and rape her in the street in front of everyone. The moment an acquaintance introduced the prospective rich tenants, the American couple, to her, and she laid eyes on Samira's obvious charms and unmatchable beauty, the old woman felt at ease and consented to rent them the unused section of her property. The house is in the name of her deceased husband, and hence she is the sole heir. The old woman is known as Sakina. Soon after giving birth to her son, Khalid, her husband succumbed to cancer. It is no surprise that no one came forward to marry her in the following years. From an early age, Khalid began to work to support his mother. In the Third World, there is no such thing as child abuse either in marriage or work. Any father is allowed by law to give his daughter in marriage at any age he so desires, and all children can be put to work the moment they can work. In Sudan, the law allows the father to give his daughter in marriage to any man at the age of 10 years. Moreover, a child soldier is allowed in every Muslim country. Many children are forced through compulsory military conscription to join the Islamic Jihadi troops. At the age of 12, Khalid joined an Islamic terrorist group known as the Muslim Brotherhood. When his hands were strong enough to carry a gun and fight at the age of 14, he joined the Sudanese army. His heart's desire that, as they say, his Allah had fulfilled, was to die in the way of Allah, in the Islamic Holy War, against the Christian infidels of the south of Sudan. Before his death, Khalid had killed many innocent children, raped a lot of young women, and massacred a large number of men during his holy war against the southern Sudanese rebels. Khalid and his comrades practiced a kind of jihad called Nika al-Qiz. This type of jihad is eviler than the jihad which ISIS and Al-Qaeda's terrorists are practicing against women in Syria and Iraq. Both kinds of jihads involve capturing and raping the women of the enemies, but the latter is worse than the former. In the case of jihad of ISIS Mujahideen, the Syrian, Iraqi, and Yazidi women are captured and raped, and then either sold as slaves or become permanent slaves to their captors. But in Nika al-Qiz, the women of the enemy would not survive for long after being captured and raped by their captors. They would not be expressly killed, per se. Their death would be the result of the brutal way in which they were raped. The Muslim Mujahideen who fight in the south of Sudan believe that the women of their enemy are religiously unclean and have dirty bodies. Accordingly, they use al-Qiz while they are raping them so that they will not be defiled by their uncleanness. Al-Qiz is a plastic bag that is commonly used to bag groceries. Cheap and disposable, it is used in the place of a proper condom. The selling or possession of condoms is strictly forbidden in many Muslim countries. It is a lesser crime to be arrested with a bottle of alcohol or drugs in your hand than a condom in your pocket. The Sudanese Mujahideen use those filthy plastic bags instead of condoms while they are raping their victims. After having sex, the plastic bags disintegrate and remain inside the private parts of those infidel girls, eventually causing serious illness. Before their reuse, these plastic bags have already been discarded and thrown in filthy garbage containers. The mujahideen collect the dirty plastic bags from the garbage containers, wrap them around their penises, and proceed to rape their captive women. Among their female victims, there are female children from the ages of 9 to 12 years old. The contaminated bags will cause infection and disease and ultimately lead to the death of the so-called infidel women. After he had committed those hideous crimes against those innocent southern men, and their underage women, and little female children, it is said that the martyr Khalid is in paradise, and his Allah has married him with 72 virgins. Blind faith can make the person believe any lies of the devil. What Sakina and Salwa believe about the fate of their deceased relative is merely the lie of Satan that has been falsely clothed with the attire of divine revelation. No doubt about it, the so-called martyred soldier of Allah, Khalid, is now in the bottomless pit, and he will be burning in the lake of fire for eternity. Chapter 20. The three rival wives and their polygamous husband. The first problem the American couple must tackle is social communication. No matter how much they tried, they could not find a single Sudanese man or woman in that town who can speak English. So far, they have used body language to communicate with people, but it has proven too tiring and useless. It cannot enable them to cope in the long term and carry out their secret mission. Samir and Samira were aware of this problem before they arrived in En-Nahid city. Some Sudanese at Khartoum advised them to find Eritrean refugee girls and hire 2 or 3 of them as helpers. It is unbelievably cheap to hire them. For $10 to $20 per month, you can hire a girl to work for you from sunrise to sunset. Some lustful Sudanese guys use her for sex with the same salary, and if she refused, she might be raped or would be fired. Most of the Eritrean refugees in Sudan are educated and multilingual. They speak 4 languages: Amharic, Tigrinya, Arabic, and English. Many Eritrean boys and girls who came to Sudan as refugees live in the UN camps. Some of them make their escape and live in big cities like Khartoum, Port Sudan, Gadaref, Kassala, and other cities. They aim to reach foreign embassies in the capital city of Sudan, and then apply for resettlement in Western countries. During their illegal movements from place to place, they expose themselves to all kinds of financial exploitation and sexual abuse by the police authorities and local people. They will be employed as servants and maidservants in Sudanese houses. Most of the Eritreans studied in English medium in their country before their circumstances had compelled them to come to Sudan as displaced refugees. With the help of the ladies Sakina and Salwa, Samir and Samira employed 2 refugee girls as their domestic helpers. They are young girls of 16 and 17 years old. One has been employed as a maidservant, and one is hired as an interpreter. We will speak about their work duties later. The Sudanese with whom Samir and Samira are staying is a small family of 2 widowed women, but their neighboring family is as large as all life. It is the biggest family the American couple has ever heard of. At first, Samira thought it is 3 families living together in one big house. Somehow, they reminded her of her former co-joined family when she was enslaved in an abusive marriage in Mumbai with her selfish Christian husband Bruno Fernandez and his 2 mean sisters Natlin and Sylvia. Through her new girlfriend Salwa, Samira gleaned that their neighbor is polygamous and has 3 wives and 21 children. It is not called 3 families, but it is a kind of 3-in-1 family. The whole family consisted of 25 members, if we include the polygamist husband. Some of the children are almost living in Sakina's house. From 6 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the evening, the children will be playing and running in and out between the 2 neighboring houses. Very often, they eat their 3 meals in Sakina and Salwa's house, and at night some of them fall asleep in the same place. In Sudan, neighbors have equal rights in each other's houses. These rights are not imposed by law or religious authority of the Quran or a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, but they are customs that go back in antiquity before the advent of Islam in Sudan. The neighboring girlfriends can share everything except their husbands. However, this restriction is not there in the case of 2, 3, or 4 women married to the same man. In that case, whether they like it or not, they must have sex as common property. If the polygamous husband sleeps today with his first wife, tomorrow he must have sex with his second wife, the third day he must fuck his third wife, and after that his fourth wife must make love with him on her bed too. But here we are talking about neighboring women. To grasp this strange social norm, we should remember how a Muslim house is built, with 2 distinct gender-segregated sections. The 2 female neighbors can have access and the same rights on everything on the women's section, the men's section being out of bounds. This point will become clearer through observing their daily practical life. As we have already mentioned, with the help of Sakina and Salwa, the American couple found and employed 2 Eritrean girls, one as an Arabic-English interpreter and guide and the other as a maidservant, cleaner and cook. For simplicity, let us just say one girl is an interpreter and the other girl is a cook. The interpreter is called Mona and the cook Zara. Both refugee girls have been given a small hut in the women's section, paid for of course by the new tenants. Although it is not mentioned in the verbal contract, the 2 girls found themselves doing work for their American employers as well as for Sakina and Salwa. Samira is allowed special dispensation to live with her husband in the men's section. This is not permitted in normal circumstances under any condition. It is as if a divine law stated in the Holy Quran that a female is to be born, brought up, and die in her respective women's section. One may ask then logically, how a wife can sleep with her husband at night. This will be the only exception to the rule, one which must be done in full secrecy and under the cover of night. As soon as the wife accomplishes her matrimonial duties, she is expected to return from the men's section, again under the cover of darkness, to her female quarters. Circumstances compelled the 2 poor widows to write off that divine restriction and allow the Indian wife Samira and the 2 Eritrean girls to move freely between the women's quarters and the men's section any time they want. The American husband Samir, on the other hand, is absolutely persona non grata in the women's section. Therefore, Samir is dependent on his wife for access and reports at the end of the day so he can record his notes on his laptop. In the meantime, Samira is amazed by the mixing of the 2 neighboring houses to the point she assumes that the 2 families are related by blood. Salwa corrected her, confirming that there are neither blood relations nor matrimonial binds. They are simply good neighbors. As the days rolled by, Samira's Eritrean girl interpreter filled her in, and much of the dynamics and goings-on of the large family of the polygamous husband. Samir also showed more interest in learning about the family of 3 wives than the family of 2 widows. Samira learned about the 3 rival wives and their many verbal and physical fights. Not a single day can pass without disagreement erupting. Usually, the problem begins with 2 small children's quarrels and catalyzes into a full-blown fight between their mothers. The old widow, Sakina, can always be counted upon to act as an arbitrator or female judge. As is the custom, one aggrieved wife laments and complains to Sakina about an alleged injustice perpetrated by another rival wife. Then the old Sakina must go and talk to the other wife and try to solve the problem and restore peace. These quarrels never reach the ears of their common husband. The polygamous husband leaves the house in the early morning hours to work and only returns in the evening. As is customary, the husband is not the least bit expected to know what transpires in his absence. Their polygamist neighbor is a butcherman. In the third world, butchery is one of the hardest and most dangerous jobs. The butcher's duties are not limited to slaughtering the animal and selling its meat, but also involved acquiring the animal. The locals simply cannot afford to buy and eat chicken and eggs every day. The butcher fills this void by catching sheep, goats, camels, oxen, and cows. Being a key link in the supply and demand chain, butchers are rich people in the third world. That is why he can afford to marry 3 women at the same time and feed his 21 kids. Butchers live in big houses, amassed wealth, and have an abundance of meat. The last possessions are regarded as great assets. That precious commodity can enable the butcher to feed his family well and make his wives fat and hot. In Africa and Arabia, it is the fat woman that is more sexually desirable and more precious than silver and gold, and her dowry is so high. Many poor families in Sudan cannot afford to purchase meat and hence buy bones, cook them, and eat. And that leads to many dogs being left to starve and die of hunger. All 3 rival wives learn through experience that involving their commonly shared husband in their domestic disputes will inevitably result in a merciless pummeling and a cold bed for many days. It must come as no surprise that wife-beating is legal in Islam. The punishment of the rebellious wife or disobedient daughter is stated in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 34. In a fleeting period in this vibrant environment, Samira and Samir collected enough data to enable them to author a large book on the topic of polygamy in Muslim society. Polygamy has many adverse consequences for the rival wives and their offspring. The children grow up confused and neglected. The wife does not enjoy full rights to her polygamous husband or her biological children. Each rival wife believes she must correct and bring up not only her children, but the children of the other rival wives too. Oddly enough, a rival wife in Arabic is called an al-dara, which means the female evildoer. Imagine that Islam allows each married man to bring 1, 2, or 3 female evildoers to his first wife. If the rival wife happens to be an evil woman, which is always the case, any excuse can result in the beating of other children. This evil act of course leads to punitive retaliation on the part of the aggrieved mothers. And so on. Polygamy creates anger and frustration in the hearts of each rival wife due to a lack of enough love, sex, and security. At any time, a Muslim husband is at the right to divorce his wife without assigning any reason. Also, at any time, he is entitled to marry another woman. In such situations, insecurities and sexual frustrations are vented within the household, with no one spared from the destructive melee. Women in Sudan, as observed, fight by pulling out each other's hair, biting bodies, and scratching faces. While beating each other, their mouths continue to berate their female opponents, assigning bad insults like dirty whore, black witch, a she-dog, daughter of a prostitute, galva, which means an uncircumcised woman, and khadim, a female slave. The galva woman is the most insulting word in Sudan. A Sudanese woman can tolerate being called a dirty female slave, or a black witch or filthy bitch, but she will kill you if you call her a galva girl. As we mentioned already, it means an uncircumcised woman, but in fact, it has a deeper meaning than that. This word is usually used to refer to non-Muslim women such as Christians of South Sudan and Nuba Mountains and other pagan African women who worship Satan. Those women are considered dirty infidels because they do not genitally mutilate their private parts or circumcise their little girls. Sometimes, a fight between the rival wives may be a result of jealousy due to the difference in age and beauty. Usually, the polygamist man prefers the company of his newest, youngest, and prettiest wife. This is not a rule set in stone, but Arab men are by nature obsessed with small female children. No matter how ugly and dumb the small wife will always be preferred and adored. Islam requires that the polygamist husband must spend each night with a different wife, and each rival wife must get an equal share in sex, love, and maintenance. It is not hard to imagine this to be an impossible rule to equitably enforce. How can a man sleep with his 16-year-old fourth wife, and on the following night have equally passionate sex with his 60-year-old first wife? Looking good on paper, but every polygamist man is a dirty cheater. He uses a 7th century law of the desert to torture and unjustly hurt his first wife. Moreover, this outdated law requires the wife to agree to share her husband's love, sex, and wealth with other rival women. She must tolerate all this nonsense because they are supposedly having equal divine rights given by God to their polygamous husband. Allah has given none of the women the right to practice polyandry, but He gave that right to His preferred creature, the man. Muslim religious leaders will tell you it is against the man's nature to share his wife with another man. It also is against the woman's nature to share her life partner with other rival female enemies. God is love and He cannot possibly command such injustice. That unjust law came out of the mind of a selfish Arab man, who was a womanizer, adulteress, rapist, pedophile, and child abuser. At times, quarrels between rival wives happen due to the difference between the perceived intelligence levels of the male children, or the difference in beauty between the female children. For a Muslim woman, intelligent boys and beautiful girls are great assets. A pretty girl can be married at a noticeably early age, and an intelligent boy has assured a respectable position in society. Therefore, if any rival wife feels that her children are lacking in their required virtues, she will look for any reason to engage the other wives in a fight. Those 3 rival wives of the butcher happened to be close to each other in age. This fact merely increased the competition between them. Each woman desires to gain the favor and approval of her husband. Each wife wants to be the most beautiful and sexy female partner. Not much different from the prostitutes, who doll themselves up and wait patiently on the thresholds of their brothel houses, waiting for male visitors to make their choices. They will do anything to swing the odds in their favor. Likewise, each wife spares no effort to make herself look more attractive and sexually desirable. The Indian wife Samira is amazed by the extent of trouble each of the 3 rival wives takes to prepare herself for her husband. She observed them closely and watched how they make themselves beautiful. Each wife spends a few hours removing hair from her hands, underarms, legs, and private parts. It is the most painful experience that Samira ever went through when she decided to try out their primitive beauty techniques. With no female beauty parlor in town, Sudanese women use antediluvian means to remove unwanted hair, commonly relying on lemon juice, sugar, and water. Those 3 substances will be boiled on the stove for a long time, until some thick liquid like gummy or strong glue results. This glue then will be used to rip out the hair from their legs, hands, underarms, and private parts by its follicles. The beauty regimen begins with the hands, moving downwards to the legs, then the underarms, and finally descending to the vagina. The wife will typically be in tears while she is undergoing such self-mortification. Of course, only a married woman can go through these enhancement processes. An unmarried maiden is not permitted to touch her body in that way, especially her pussy. This restriction is imposed on unmarried girls for the fear of being sexually self-stimulated while exploring their private parts, and that may lead to masturbation or fornication. Masturbation is forbidden because the virgin may break her hymen and lose her virginity before marriage. Such a girl may be slain by her bridegroom on his bed on their first wedding night. And if she is not killed, she will be sent back to her father's house as an unwanted whore. Yet, another self-inflicted torture that every wife must submit to is smoking her body. This experience should not be confused with sunbathing on a beach or a stint in the sauna. Every self-respecting Sudanese wife must have a small hole inside her kitchen. When it is time for her beatification process, wooden coal is lit, and the embers are fed pieces of Indian sandalwood. When the desired fumes emerged, the wife divests her body of clothes, becomes buck naked, and wraps herself in a thick black blanket, like a burqa. After that, she must spread her legs and sit akin to a woman sitting on a toilet bowl. She remains seated until the sandalwood is fully consumed by the burning coals. During this period, she will be coughing, sneezing, sweating terribly, with tears running down her cheeks like hot acid. This painful self-mortification will continue for hours until her body sheds rivers of sweat. Smoking the body through this primitive method cannot make it look beautiful because 90% of Sudanese women are as dark as coals. There are no discernible benefits from this primitive method. Despite this, the typical Sudanese claim it makes the wife sexier, and her body becomes delicate. Scholars researching the origin of this primitive custom have found that ancient Sudanese women used that smoke as a magical method to stir the sexual desires of men. When the smoked body woman walks on the street, men smell the sweet aroma of the sandalwood wafting off her body, associate the scent with sex, and follow her akin to a bitch in heat, welcoming all male comers. 99% of Sudanese women believe smoking themselves makes their bodies sexier. Every one of them is made to believe by smoking her naked body now, and then she makes her genitally mutilated pussy smaller, and she becomes just like a virgin. And that, as they say, shall please her husband during sex, and leads him to desire her more than his other women,